as community-based aid, they'll keep all the programs, so that's what we gotta do, right? Just no money.
Right.
Yeah, we gotta make sure that doesn't happen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, our next issue that we would like to talk about is our juvenile detention per diem.
Disclosure forms.
And who put this?
Is that your
on?
wife?
You did? Okay, and
Computer?
Carrie,
My kids, 'cause
one
my
of two
crash.
things, if when you speak, if you could come to the podium or just tell me, if you're like back there, I'll bring you the mic, because as they're changing out back there, people are having a hard time hearing back there, so we'll use the microphone a little bit more now. Do you want me to just give it to you? Yep.
Lancaster County put this item on, a little bit of a follow-up to the meeting with Senator Crist that Todd had mentioned earlier. We were chastised quite roundly because our per diem is the highest in the state. And in fact, he said it was probably $100 higher than Douglas County's per diem. So we feel that we are including all our costs, and so we started looking at this more carefully, and did I think Shelley Schindler did call Brad Alexander to see what the differences were between what's being included in our per diem and in Douglas County. What we found was a few things that would be obvious. So we do have a lower staff to youth ratio, so we're and I think 2 is all the difference there. But where the real big difference is in the per diems is that we include all our direct costs and we include depreciation in our per diem. There's costs that are attributable here, and we figure they need to be in the cost center where they're being spent. So when you're talking about indirect costs, you're talking about things like workers' compensation, you're talking about personnel costs, attorney costs, information service costs, a lot of these components. We also have a rent component in our per diem, where our county property management determines what is the cost of operating all the properties in the county, and that's going to be divvied back to whichever department it is. So they're actually paying rent. It's like we're paying rent to ourselves, but we're getting the cost into the cost center. And also we have depreciation, which is an actual cost that goes into there. So for last year, or the budget year that we're in, we determined that if you add in all of those costs, our per diem is about $307 a day. I think Douglas County is some 220, 225, I think, in that range. We feel this is important for several reasons. Number one, if you don't have all your costs in your per diem, then the costs that the state should be paying for post-adjudication care are being shifted to your property taxpayers, pure and simple. In our case for last year, we figured that was about $31 a day. By Shelley Schindler's calculations, then from what the state is paying us, which is $276 to the 307, it's about $31 a day. That's over $400,000 of additional costs that is being paid by the property taxpayers. It also gives a false impression to the state about what is the true cost of incarceration. They don't have as much of an incentive to go towards the community-based programs, which some anecdotal, but we do have a lot of data on this. There's no question community-based services in the juvenile area are cheaper and more effective. If you're not including all your costs in your per diem, then you're skewing that. You're giving the impression that it's not quite as expensive to keep the kids incarcerated as it really is. So we feel it's very important. Get all those costs in there. This is what's being paid. Whether it's the county paying it or the state paying it or a combination of county and state paying it, this is what it actually costs. So it's important to know that, especially when you're looking at the alternatives, and especially when the state just doesn't seem to be funding those alternatives. And if we can let them continue to shift a big portion of the costs for keeping the youth in custody, then they're not going to have the same incentive to look at that. I think we've probably gone over this before. When we built our new youth services center in the 1990s, We had several consultants. One was Earl Dunlop, who was kind of the father of JDI. He was one of the first persons to come up with this concept of community-based is better than incarcerating pre-adjudication and then shipping off to out-of-home placements afterwards. And a woman named Karen Chin told us unless we get our community-based programs in place, graduated sanctions, bracelet programs, and a whole slew of other programs, that we're going to have that facility filled up in 10 years. At the time we built it, we had about 45 kids that were pre-adjudication. Today's count, we have 3. And it's directly attributable to that. It needs to move on to the next level. And one of the ways we can do that is to capture all the costs in the per diem.
Gary, so are you saying you don't do that right now, or you do that right now?
We do that, and we've done that for a long time. We have an indirect cost study that's done by a company called Maximus, which we needed when we had Lancaster Manor and others. So we know what the indirect costs are. We know what the share of the county attorney, with information services, all these other expenses. So we put that in there. Now we don't collect it because the state simply refuses to say they say, well, that's too high. So, well, that's what it costs. Well, it's too high, we're not paying it. So for the difference between what it costs us and what we're being paid now, we're losing $31 a day.
Deb?
I could just follow up. When we met with Senator Chris, one of the things that I hadn't heard before were the possibility of closing the youth treatment centers in York and Geneva and rehousing those youth closer in their home community. So I think it's particularly important that we have an accurate representation of what a per diem is, because the state could be possibly reimbursing us to house those kids back in local facilities. So if we don't have a handle on what those costs are now, we'll have no chance of getting an accurate reimbursement when they close those facilities and move those kids.
So that's why we would encourage everyone to look at those costs, look at the true cost of what it is, just so that information can be
And they do have concern about that conversation that you just mentioned, Deb, because my head starts spinning about mental health reform. How the state wanted to remove the individuals from their cost through regional centers and put them back in our communities, and that's kind of really the same thing that they're doing with the juvenile centers in Hastings and Geneva.
Well, your point, Mary Ann, during that conversation, sorry. I guess to follow up on your point, during that conversation that we had with Senator Christ, he actually made a reference to designing a regional system for juvenile justice, which, knowing what we know about the region systems for behavioral and developmental disabilities, I don't know if that model, that is something that we should obviously pay close attention to moving forward. And that's why we did want to put the per diem on here, is so that when we go into these conversations that we actually are talking about apples to apples and not apples to oranges.
Right? I think I know what you're going to say.
You're right, I need one. Yeah, in Sarpy County, similar to Lancaster County, we use the same firm, Maximus. Our population has gone down to about 6, where we were well up into the 20s, but our staffing has not gone down accordingly. And so the rate that Maximus computed for us, including all of our indirect costs, is actually about $639. Also similar to Lancaster County, we can not get state probation to pay us that much, and we're currently billing probation about $256 a day. So we're a little bit below Lancaster County, but now that we know Lancaster County is getting 277, we'll shoot for that too. But the money that we are getting from probation has really increased over the last couple of years, since 561 and 644 passed. And in the first quarter of this year, we got $390,000 from them. And so that's much higher than what we were getting when we were, HHS was responsible for paying us. So that's kind of where we're at.
And we've actually, oh, Patrick, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so if they close.
Can you stand up or come up here, because it's hard for people to hear.
I'll talk about it. So if they close these two centers and then they reimburse us, like they do with jail reimbursement, so then a few years later, then we're gonna be stuck with the whole bill, right?
Pretty much.
That's something what they were.
Yeah, Joe,
One of the things too,
can you stand up?
Oh, sure. Patrick, I think that's a great point, and I think if you go back and you look at the history of behavioral health reform, one of the things that they were very conscious of doing was we're going to shift the dollars from the two facilities in Hastings and Norfolk, and we're going to send that back out in community aid. It's important to note that I think roughly the number is 67. The number was about, I think it hit about 72 million in dollars that were moving out of those two facilities, and in total aid that came back to community-based programming. It's important to note a couple of things. One, that has been cut over the years systematically in aid back to those behavioral health needs. And second, that there has been no increase ever in those dollars. So we can expect that if they do go in that direction of closing down those two facilities, oh, we'll just give you the lump sums and we'll send them out there. But guess what's always on the table every year? Cuts. Well, is there a better way to do this? So to your point, that's all I could think about when I was sitting here listening to it is we should be on guard for what that might look like.
And to just add one more thing, I would caution every commissioner to be paying very close attention to, on the regional level, this is for the behavioral health now, not juvenile, but I need to say this because I forgot last time. We had Brenda sits on the Region 6 board with me, and we had a visit from the director of Behavioral Health Division. And she had been having conversations with the regional program administrators about these cuts that were being requested of each department within state government for the governor. Well, it started out that the request was come up with a 10% decrease in your budgets, and you know the governor's asking for everybody to do this. Well, then it came back and it was like, well, why don't you tweak it a little bit and let's see what 8 looks like. And I was like, okay. At the same time, I'm hearing some conversations from the sheriffs who they're being kind of, at their association, having conversations, and it's a different number. Well, the director then says, well, let's look at a 3% and see what we get. Well, it came down to the fact that it really wasn't at the, quote, request of the governor for regional program administrators to do this exercise. It was the state director of Behavioral Health Division asking the regional program administrators to do it because she had 3 things she wants to get in her budget that done, and she knows with budget cuts and the condition of the budget, the state budget's in, that she can't go ask for any money, any new money. So she was actually going to use, and probably still will try, to use regional dollars to be put back, cut from the regional budgets, put back in her budget so that she can do these 3 initiatives. And our director said, you know, how is that going to benefit Region 6, what you want to do? How is that going to benefit Region 5 and the rest of the regions? And so I would caution all of you just to be very alert at these cuts because it starts getting pretty dicey, as we all know. But again, that shift, I think we're going to start seeing more and more of this year.
Well, to add on to that, what's been happening the last few years is the reallocation through the regions. The other regions throughout the state are not utilizing the dollars the way that Region 5 and Region 6 are. And so the money that gets returned to the state, which seems, you know, counterintuitive, when they reallocate that money again, they reallocate it on the same formula that they did originally. So you have regions who are being reallocated money that they already turned back because they didn't utilize it. And so then what happens then, as at the end of the year, you have several $1 million sitting there, whereas Region 5 and Region 6 are fully utilizing every dollar. I mean, every program unit of service has been bought, but what's happening is you have this pool of money sitting there, and that's an easy target for an administration that is looking to save money.
And on the, back to the juvenile side, I mean, the juvenile detention alternatives that we've been able to implement in Douglas County literally have saved us. Juveniles being in our detention center. I mean, when we built our detention center, we built it to house 144. We hit an all-time high of about 200, averaging 200 kids in our juvenile detention center before we started to implement these juvenile detention alternatives. And so today, we generally see about a 90 number for our juvenile center. So the alternatives have worked. But again, that pot of money that we get to give to providers, as well as to internal departments that utilize those dollars to provide these programs, it is paying off. I mean, we're not housing as many kids anymore in our secure or non-secure facility. They're being provided services in the community where we increase the home program, the bracelet program. Those are being utilized much more than what they were in the past. So again, another pot of money that we're gonna have to, unfortunately, you know, we play a lot of defense rather than offense, but we're gonna have to play defense on being able to keep those community-based dollars for the juveniles. But to your point, I understand, Carrie, what you're saying about the per diem.
Yeah, it's I mean, you need to know the true costs, because it's really the area of post-adjudication that you're not seeing the community-based alternatives available. If the state could look at that and say, hey, we could spend the same amount of money, we'd have fewer kids in detention, and we'd have a more effective system. But as long as the counties are picking up a portion of the tab for the locking the kids up, they just don't have the incentive to look at that as much.
Anything else on item 3? Next is the discussion regarding employee and retiree health insurance. Who put this one on? Did we? Yeah, we did. Do you want to come up and talk about it?
I don't have anything really prepared, but I can just tell you to summarize what the county board's been looking at, and that is the ever-increasing cost of health insurance, particularly as it relates to not only current employees but retirees. We're projecting our costs for our employee/retiree health plan to go up approximately 18%. And we are going to internally eat half of that through our health insurance reserve fund, and then we will pass on a 9% increase to our employees. Another change that we made this year is to increase the percentage that retirees are going to contribute to their premiums. Previously, it's been that an employee with single coverage would pay 25% of the cost of the premium, a single retiree, and a family retiree with family coverage would pay 35%, and that's going up to 40-50. Is that right, Joe? 40% for single retiree coverage and 50% for family retiree coverage, which has gotten, obviously, the attention of the unions has got some pushback, but that's what's being implemented. So the question now is, what do we do going forward in the long term? So the county board is going to be looking at several options for both active and retiree coverage. Particularly with the active coverage is, do we do something completely different? And one of the options would be to contract with one facility. So maybe we contract with Methodist Health System, or we contract with Nebraska Med Center, or we contract with CHI, and everybody has to go there. And I know that they've done that in Sedgwick County. I think there really is only one health system in Sedgwick County, so it makes it a lot easier. But that is one of the things, particularly that one of the unions wants us to look at. So that is one option. Another option, there's been all kinds of options. Do we give money to employees and let them go buy their own coverage, which I really don't think is a viable option. So really what the staff is gonna be tasked with looking at some options going forward, you know, for the long term. And then of course retiree healthcare, most places don't provide retiree coverage. So that's really something that we're gonna have to take a long, hard look at. And then, you know, we have Rule 75, which means people retire early, potentially, particularly in law enforcement and corrections. So they retire at 50, let's say 51 years old, and then they don't get Medicare until they're 65. So then what do they do if they don't have retiree coverage? They, you know, they have Obamacare, and you don't know what's gonna happen with the exchanges. That's not, I guess the optimism level for the future of that is probably not very high. So that's really where we're at right now. We're really being forced to look at some creative ways to do things differently. And of course, the other thing is out there is ACOs. And accountable care organizations may or may not be the future. There are a lot of strong points with ACOs, but the pushback is, particularly with the unions, is it's a glorified HMO. And any of us that were, you know, employed with the counties in the 90s know how that went over. So that's kind of a synopsis of where we're at.
So just, does Sarpy and Lancaster provide insurance to their retirees?
At Lancaster, we do not. We do not. There's a COBRA, so it gets you a little bit of time, but we are more involved with a PEP program, a post-employment health program, where during your career, you get $25 put away, you know, every pay period, and it goes into a PEP account. And then when you retire, you are, depending on which group you're in, you get part of your accumulated sick leave paid out, and it goes into that PEP account. So then that way, when you walk out of the building, you've got this PEP account, and then you can utilize that for your health insurance costs, meds, things like that, but you're really then off of our books. So basically, once you walk out, then I guess we could say Lancaster County then no longer cares. You know, you take your money and you go do what you need to, and our liability is gone.
We care, but we're not going to pay us.
I speak from the financial side when we don't care. But from the financial side, we don't care.
And what's your retirement age or program? Is it a rule like ours?
It is not.
10 years of service and then 55. Yeah, early retiring, 10 years of service at 55. For IRS purposes, I think it's 59 and a half.
But you know, our retirement program is a lot different than yours also, because you know, once you walk out that door, you've got your pool here, and that's it. So
What's the city do in Lincoln?
At least like 1 month.
same.
The union probably they have a PEP program as well.
Yeah, they've got a PEP program over there also. So they don't have a huge liability on the retiree. You got your fire and your police.
And what about Sarpy?
I'll give a copy to, I may just look at a copy, I'll give it on to Lancaster one, I'll give you one too.
The front page is just what our actual premium is going to be this year for current employees. Option 2 is what the county board selected. And the only change we made this year to try to keep our premium down was to increase the out-of-pocket cost of the employee. So there's been a lot of debate about what the employee's contribution ought to be on a monthly basis for their insurance. On the second page is the retiree one, and you can see it's based on what union they're in or whether they're management, they're salaried management, and it's kind of all over the board in terms of when they're eligible to get the benefit. The one thing that's not is that they have to have worked for the county for 15 years. So unless they've worked for the county for 15 years, they would not be eligible for retiree health insurance. And you can see what our percentages would be for single or family coverage based on their age when they leave. But I will say that we have very few people that take the retiree benefit.
But what age are they retiring?
Well, it depends. The ones that would retire earlier might be law enforcement, but you see that if most of them have family coverage and they have to pay, for example, 50% of the premium, they don't do it. They can't afford it. So they stay on longer, and so they normally don't retire until they're like 62 or 63 or some even 65, and then they can go on Medicare. So even though it's a reasonably good benefit for retirees, the cost of it is so high that we just don't have just maybe a handful of people that would take the benefit.
And Larry, as far as the other counties in the program through NACO, that's not provided, right?
I'm not aware of any other county that offers a retirement plan to any of those employees. Recently, the NACO board just negotiated a thing with First Concord to assist people as they reach that retirement age for the possibility that they can leave their county plan and the county can put together sort of a package, not a PEP program, but it's similar to that. It's somewhat of a in lieu of plan that if they elect to go over to Medicare, then there is some money that comes through, and First Concord will help them with the paperwork to get that filled out through the federal government. And so it's a new program that's being offered really to all counties, but the county has to have a process in place where you compensate them some amount of money to come off of your health insurance.
Any other questions or comments on that? I know one of the other things that, and Marcos, if you want to chime in terms of the union perspective, one of the other ideas that they brought up was to do a big push to get more people on the HSA program that we have. We have a limited number of individuals on that, and we give 1,000 or 500. 1,000 to each employee for being on that program in terms of like wellness stuff and that. So it's a good program, but when we first started it, there was a lot of misinformation and I would say fear from employees that were hearing bad things about HSA programs, and so there was a limited number of employees that actually took advantage of it. But the union, especially our sheriff's union, feels that there should be a bigger push to move folks towards that program, and that would save a lot of money on insurance costs. Marcos, I don't know if you have anything else you want to, there was kind of what they talked about, those three things.
Yeah.
Patrick?
But just a couple of things. One, I'll say,
Can you stand up, Pat?
Okay, just one thing I'll say, my experience is unions hate HSAs because it, I'll say loud, and their language, they forces employees to make more independent decisions about their own health care. And unions don't like that. They're very paternalistic. This is me. They're very paternalistic, and so they want basic PPO health plan with the low deductibles. One of the unions is pushing a central states plan, which is a Teamsters plan, which 71 of our employees, highway department employees, are on now. There's some issues with that plan. For example, if an employee wants to waive out of that plan, not take the coverage, the county still has to pay the full cost of that premium to central states, whether the employee is covered or not. It also doesn't provide retiree health insurance. There's some other aspects. It is lower deductibles, but there's some other aspects of it that are not, in my opinion, employee friendly or county friendly. But that is a push that's going to be made, is to go more employees, more bargaining is going to central states. But I agree with Mary Ann. HSA is the way to go, but it's how you get there.
And that central states plan, you also do not get claim history for your county. It's claim history as a whole. And that is not a good thing for counties in terms of trying to figure out what your costs are, so. But we had, in the past, we had a pretty, it ebbs and flows, but, you know, we've had good years where our claims were pretty low, and this past year they were really, really high, so that's where, again, some of the 18% increase came, was because we had a bad claim year. No.
I'd be interested to know, what are, on your family and single plans in Douglas and Lancaster County, what are your cost shares for your employees? 80-20?
80-20. So, yeah, on Lancaster.
Oh, I'm sorry, for what? For the cost or for the premium?
For the premium.
Oh, okay, Marcus.
Yeah, it depends what, and maybe it helps if I give a little background on our insurance in general, but cost share depends what classification you're in. So if you're single, as an example, it's 93.7, and then it changes, it broadens depending on the classification that you're put in. So employee plus one, employee family coverage, employee plus two, whatever. So, but it does start off for all of our plans at 93.7 for the single one. That's the one where the county covers the most. A little bit of background on our plans.
But it's 85-15.
But it's 85-15, right, for the
Perfect.
right, the one that is least covered by the county. The county covers 85%. So that's the smallest amount. A little bit of background on our plans though. We have like, okay, oh, thanks Coach. I would say like about a year ago, we had about half of our employees on, I guess I'll count back a little bit. We have one health insurance plan, like one PPO plan, but we have two different plans as far as two different deductible plans. So there's a 300-600 plan, and then there's a 600-1200 plan. And depending on what union you were in, you were put in the low deductible plan or the high deductible plan. We have seen performance, like claims, in the higher plan be much cheaper than the lower plan. So over the course of 2 years through negotiations, Diane and I have been trying to migrate unions over to the higher deductible plan, the 600-1200 plan, 600 single, 1200 plan. And you know, and it's been kind of a challenge. The premiums are cheaper, and they will be in 2017 too, in the higher deductible plan, as you would expect. But it's getting people to migrate. We're right now, I believe, at about 70% of our union employees have migrated to that higher deductible plan. I still have about 30% on that lower plan. So.
So on the Lancaster side, for singles, the majority of the employees, it's 95.5. We do have one that's 93.7. And then on the other 2 to 4 and the families, the majority of them are 85-15. We do have one union that's 80-20.
So I have an opinion on this, and I'm probably alone, so let me just make sure I point that out. But both of you, Lancaster and Douglas, have better plans than we have in Sarpy County, and I believe our plans in Sarpy County are unaffordable. We're 83-17 and 90-10, and I think there's a little nuance in there for adult plus one. It might be somewhere, it's a little less than 83-17. I don't recall what it is. And we also have a wellness plan, which is voluntary. We implemented that about 2 years ago under like a crawl, walk, run approach to try to incentivize people to get involved. We give them a gift certificate or something nominal like that. But I think where we need to head is I mean, again, private sector, 83-17, are you kidding me? Nobody does that. I mean, most corporations are 60-40. Some of the more generous ones are 66-33. But I mean, And I understand how we got here, because there was a time when government jobs, salaries weren't as competitive as the private sector, but that's not the case anymore. So we've got labor unions that we can only negotiate with once every 3 years. And in Sarpent County, I'm sure it's similar in the other counties, we have 5 different labor unions we have to negotiate with individually. And they're all at different times. But about a year and a half ago, we had Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and they came to us and said, Sarpent County, we love you guys, and we're raising your premiums 15%. Or maybe it was even higher. And we said, well, we can't afford that. That's unsustainable for us. So we went out on the market and thought we could get a better deal. And you know, we believed the sales pitch from another company, and we switched. And after 6 months, we switched back because it was horrible. And so we're back with Blue Cross Blue Shield. Instead of paying like 18 or whatever they wanted initially, I think they kept our negotiated rate with the new company of about 12%. This year, initially, our insurance broker came to us and said, your premiums are going up over 20%. And that's not unique to Sarpent County. I mean, the city of Papillions was 35. I mean, their initial bogey. And I'm sure you guys have seen those too. So what we've done the last 3 years now with the employees is to keep their premiums at the same ratio, is we keep nickel and diming them to death. You know, we raised the deductible, we raised the cost shares, and we did it again this year. And to me, it's just a shell game. And the reality is we need to raise the premiums, the ratios, so to bring them more in line with what the county's doing. I mean, with what the private sector's doing. And the reason I say that is because it's unsustainable. This year in Sarpent County, we're paying an $860,000 in insurance costs. I mean, just do the rule of 72. You know, the last 2 cycles that we renewed our policy, our premiums have gone up 12% in each case. So we're going to double our insurance costs in a matter of 5 years, and we can't afford that. I mean, $880,000 is it could be up to 6 or 7 FTEs. I mean, we're all right now surviving under the luxury of a broadening tax base, but that's not going to continue forever. Certainly in Sarpent County, the smallest county in the state, we've developed out just about everything we can develop out, and now we're looking for innovative ways to develop out what we haven't developed out. But nevertheless, at some point, you know, we all got to be a little bit pragmatic and realistic and say we can't afford this anymore. And I'm a little discouraged to know that it's hard to make that argument in Sarpent County when I look at Lancaster and Douglas and how generous you are with your benefits. In addition, I think you have a defined pension plan, don't you? You guys, you in Lincoln, you don't? Yeah. And you do in Douglas County, correct? Defined benefit plan? Well, then that's similar in that regard. But at some point, I mean, the initiative I'm going to be pushing in my next 4 years on the county board is to increase those premiums back, because it's unaffordable, it's unsustainable. And the last thought I wanted to leave you with is I'm trying to think outside the box here. How do we drive down our costs? Well, Sarpent County, 600 employees. I don't know. Douglas is probably much larger, as is Lancaster. But I almost wonder, you know, what does the state do? I know that NACO offers a plan for all the smaller counties, and by doing that, by increasing their pool size, they're able to drive their costs down. And I wonder for the larger 3 counties, if there was something that maybe if we combined into one group for insurance, if it would save us all money in the long run, or maybe go back to the state and say, hey, maybe we need to get back in line with the state. I don't know what the answer is, but just some thoughts I got on health insurance.
Cliff?
Part of why we're so generous is the CIR has ruled for us the ratio that an employee pays is a subject of negotiation. It's in our contracts. The CIR forces us to do that. So.
In a couple of
What's our insurance cost, Joe? Do you have?
What, the total amount we pay?
Yeah, when he said 800 and some thousand for Sarpent.
They're paying
And we have in the past, actually looked at what you're exactly talking about, which I think we should look at it again just because of changes that have occurred. But we have had conversations about the NACO plan, but I think it would be beneficial to have the 3 largest counties talk about it again to see if there was any benefit. Some of the changes that we've made were along the lines of retirement, where it's not a rule of 75 for new hires, it's a straight 65, except for 65 years old, except for the sheriff's deputies. And we're hoping that that will help in terms of, you know, as we're trying to decide what the next step is with the current retiree population, that won't be an issue for the new hires down the road, because once they retire at 65, they'll go straight on Medicare unless that age gets increased. And then the wellness program, come on up, Larry. The wellness program, we actually did exactly what you did, where we incentivized them. It was a voluntary thing, and they could get a gift card if they hit so many points. But what we did this year, and we actually hired, it was an internal committee that did all of the wellness program, and we hired out Bavari, I think it's called, and we changed to a premium incentive. So if you hit these goals along the way, then you could potentially see a reduction in your premium. And we're just starting that. That was a change this year.
So the NACO pool, when you look at the NACO pool in the other counties, it would be similar, it would be actually a little bit smaller than what Douglas County is standalone in your premium costs. And I think if we were to go down this path, you know, we've sort of had this conversation many years ago at NACO of actually creating a secondary pool of the 3 largest counties, because if you take Douglas County's numbers and Lancaster County's numbers and Sarpy County's numbers and put them together, you'll have a significant pool that probably can be managed. And because even with our small numbers, there's some benefit to pooling in that area. So if that's something that the counties want to look at, certainly because we've set up a pool before, NACO's interested in helping to facilitate that conversation. I think it may be something you want to look at.
Any other comments or questions on that issue? The next one is the discussion regarding Greenbelt, criteria used to approve or deny. And who put this one on? Sarpy? Who wants to come up and talk about it?
They just walked out.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Don Kelly wanted it on there.
Don?
He just stepped out.
I'm here.
Oh, there
Do you want to come up and talk about the next issue for Greenbelt that
sure.
you want to talk?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, our county assessor, Dan Pittman's here, and we have talked back and forth about this issue for at least 3 or 4 years. And under equalization, if everybody doesn't pay their fair share of taxes, everybody else in the counties have to pick up the tab. So Greenbelt is a great law. I mean, I think personally that because it protects the farmers in urban areas, so they can continue to farm and their property values don't become so astronomical that it makes it unaffordable for them to maintain their farms. However, in Sarpy County, what I have seen a proliferation of is people that are, well, as I told Claire, just because you buy a farm, it doesn't make you a farmer. And I've talked to some of the real farmers in Sarpy County, and they really have an issue with this, because folks with 5 or 10 acres are getting Greenbelt exemption. And it's not because the assessors are generous, it's because the statute's so wide you can drive a truck through it. So what I'd kind of like to see is some sort of statutory change in the language that defines what a farm is. And we brought this up about 3 years ago and I think it was Mr. Hutchins from Lancaster County, Larry? Yeah, Hutchins, I'm sorry. And he was telling me that Lancaster, they use a Form F. Is that right, Lancaster? Do you guys require that? Or is that just Larry saying that's what he wanted? I don't recall. But I don't know what the measure is to determine a farm. But when somebody of wealth buys a 20-acre parcel in Sarpy County and comes down and pays his neighbor to roll a couple bale of hays, and then he pays property taxes that's worth 10% of the actual value, it's not fair. And so we need to arm our assessors with some tools so that they can actually assess these property values more correctly. Right now, there's really not much they can do. And here's a perfect example, and I'll leave the name out because the name's not important. But this individual has about 100 acres down on the Platte River, and it's beautiful land if you love to hunt. It's almost 100% timberland. It's very rolling slopes right off the Platte River. Has a real nice residence. I'll call it a residence. It's not a full-time residence, but it's a nice home. It's got 3 bathrooms, 3 or 4 bedrooms. It's got corrugated tin on the outside, or aluminum, so it looks more like a shed than a house, but it's really a nice place. And we took the Greenbelt exemption away because we saw no evidence of an agribusiness occurring there. And so when it came up before the Board of Equalization, the landowner's attorney came and brought some evidence to present to the Board of Equalization. That evidence included a couple pictures of a goat and another picture of a stack of timber that was cut, supposedly sold it for pallets, to build pallets. The total receipts, as I recall, were about, over a 4-year period, were less than $2,000 in agricultural income. And because the statute is so nebulous, our assessor had no option but to grant the Greenbelt exception, because that in and of itself is enough proof under the current statute to say that this is a viable agribusiness. So therefore, this person pays less property taxes than I pay on my 1/3 of an acre home site in Papillion. And it's just not right, because I was obviously under equalization, they're not paying their fair share. And there's numerous examples in Sarpy County that I could cite, and I'm sure it's the same in Douglas, and I'm sure it's the same in Lancaster. Again, I want to protect the family farm. I want to protect the folks that farm for a living, that fill out Schedule Fs, that have a viable entity to keep their property taxes at a rate that allows them to farm. Because whether you live in Douglas, Sarpy, or Lancaster County, all our heritages come from the rural folks that initially settled our county land. So I want to protect that for them as long as they want to continue to do it. But it's the people that are coming in and taking advantage of what I would call a weak statute, and really ties the hands of our assessors, that I was hoping that at least as the 3 largest counties where Greenbelt applies, we could come to some consensus to have our lobbyists and our legislators, carry that bucket of water for us down in Lincoln in the upcoming session. So that's really all I have.
Dan Pittman, Sarpy County Assessor. Let me give you a little idea where you've been. In 1985, our first definition of agricultural and horticultural land said the land had to be over 20 acres, it had to be in continuous production, it had to have local zoning predominantly for agriculture, and if you had under 20 acres, you could be considered for Greenbelt or special valuation if you could show $1,000 of income over 2 out of 3 years. So at one time, this was a pretty strict program, and it seemed to make a lot of sense. That eroded through the years, and today there's no land size requirement, there's no requirement for continuous production, there's no zoning requirement, and no proof of income. So what remains is that the land's got to be located outside the city's jurisdiction or an SID, and that the land has to be used for the commercial production of any plant or animal in a raw or unprocessed state. So that's kind of what it leaves us with in the statute, is that commercial production is a one hook. You know, if they're in commercial production, commerce is taking place, then they should be able to receive Greenbelt. Now, Senator Hudkins in the past had made an argument that there's a lot of niche farming anymore, and we've got niche farming in Sarpy County. We've got pasture chickens, which is not a free-range chicken, that's chickens raised in pastures. And I went out and I had to see this for myself, and they actually pasture chickens. But and if you're interested, I'll explain to you later. But and then woody florals, and then seeds and nuts and things like that. There's all this niche organic stuff going on. So you've got to concede that point, I think, that they're doing more with less land. But why not an income requirement? Why not show us a Schedule F? Why not give us receipts? Our homestead exemption program, there's an income requirement, and you have to file annually. Permissive exemptions, they have to file annually, but we're not monitoring this close enough. So what I'm looking for as an assessor is just something that I can require from a property owner that shows me, indeed, I am farming this, I'm getting some kind of income, and I would be happy personally. So that's it for me.
Mike Goodwillie, Douglas County Assessor's Office. Yeah, Dan's got some of the history right here. At one time, there were pretty rigid tests for both income and acreages, and it is part of that boutique agriculture that made some of it go away. If you want to go in that direction of a rigid income cap, I suppose you can, but you may have instances where you have people that are doing commercial production and haven't generated any income yet. Dan, do you have vineyards in Sarpy County?
And orchards.
Yeah, my understanding is you can go a number of years after you plant your vineyard before you get a crop that's worth anything. So what are you going to do about the guy who's planted stuff stem to stern? He's not generating any income yet, but he's doing a hell of a lot more agriculture than a guy who hays just enough to sell, you know, whatever the old test was, $1,000 a year or something like that. That's not a heck of a lot of money. I mean, the devil in this is going to be in the details. And so if you want to go forward with something, you know, by all means, if that's how you feel, but understand, once you start to put in hard and fast barriers, you're going to have people, you know, on either side of that line. You know, on one side of the line, you look at him and say, this isn't what we had in mind. On the others, you say, gee, that guy ought to qualify, but he, you know, for all intents and purposes, but he doesn't. To add another history lesson, there was 1 year, I think it was 2007, where the legislature, at the behest of Farm Bureau, adopted some legislation to try and cut back on the hobby farmers qualifying for special valuation. And they said, instead of looking at how the vacant acres are used, look at the parcel as a whole, including the buildings, you know, including the improvements. The idea was to catch that guy who's got $1 million house and he's got 10 acres and he sells a little bit of hay off of it a couple of times a year. That lasted exactly 1 year. In a lot of counties across the state, you had assessors saying to people, we don't think you qualify any longer. They exercised their rights to protest to the County Board of Equalization, and many boards had a difficult time in standing behind the new law. And that law lasted exactly a year. The very next session, the legislature at the Farm Bureau's behest, because obviously they changed their mind, went back to saying, look at the vacant acres. So this has been through a lot of history, and part of the issue behind it has been one size hasn't always fit all. So if you want to go forward, that's fine, but you may want to have some idea of what you want to do about these kind of odd socks, because there's going to be more of them than you think. Thank you.
I certainly don't want to relive 2007. That was a nightmare when we did it, and a lot of it was we were watching our neighboring county, and then they were watching us, and it was like, well, if they're getting it, then we got to get, well, how can they be like right next door and be doing it different? And I mean, it was, as Mike Goodwillie said, that you had one on this side that looked real clear to you, but then one on this side that was maybe a little iffy, but still looked pretty much like this one, so what do? And so I think, if I remember right, we basically gave it to everybody that year.
Yes, we did.
Pretty much. And again, as Mike said, it was changed. You know, so we had people who were, you know, had fish in a pond that were getting green belt, that were growing brome or
Yes, grass.
grass.
Couldn't cut seed off.
Yeah, I mean, they had cattle that came in and fed a certain number of weeks or months, and the income was there. So, I mean, it's a tough one, and it isn't a one size fits all because there's so many variables. But I do think that is one that as counties we need to take a look at, and we need to be the ones that are there at the table to really try to figure out what we want those details to be, because it is hard. Anything else on that issue? I think at this point, since we're so close to lunch and Randy coming in, why don't we take a break, have everybody do their bathroom break, and then when Randy comes here, we'll listen to him and then we'll share lunch.
Yeah.